Hi, and welcome back to Rational Egoism, the Morality for Loving Life. This is our fourth and final session, and today we're going to look at the necessary conditions for people to live rationally and egoistically. That is, by the judgment of their own minds and for their own life-serving purposes. That's the morality we've been talking about. That's the morality that is based on the requirements of human life and the very idea and the foundation that gives rise to the possibility and need of values and morality. And today we're going to look at the social conditions necessary for people to engage in that kind of living, living by the judgment of their minds and for their own life-serving purposes. As usual, though, I want to begin with a quick recap to get our bearings on what we've already discussed and to help make or foster this big integration about what this morality is all about. I want you to see rational egoism as an integrated system of observation-based ideas that support human life and happiness. That's what this morality is really all about. And so let's do just a quick recap. We'll get our heads around what we've covered so far. We've seen that the very ideas of morality and value and ought and good and the like all depend on life. Life is what makes values possible. Only living things can pursue values. And life is what makes values necessary. For a living thing to keep living, it must act to gain or keep the very requirements of its life. So those are its values. That's what values are. Moral values, the values necessary for the life of a human being, are the things that human beings must act to gain or keep in order to live and love their lives. In all of this, we've seen that values are fact-based. Morality is fact-based. Morality is objective. The factual requirements of human life constitute the standard by reference to which we can determine which actions are good or bad, right or wrong, moral or evil. Actions that support and enhance human life are good. Those that harm or destroy human life are evil. We've also seen that there is no need for a God to make morality objective. We've also seen that a God-based morality would be utterly subjective, right? It would be mere commandments issued from a subject on high, but a subject nonetheless. And that's just subjectivism. We also addressed the so-called is-ought gap by observing that you can derive an ought from an is. You can do so by focusing on the facts that give rise to the need for a concept such as ought, or should, or shouldn't, or any synonyms. The basic fact that gives rise to our need for such concepts is the fact that life is conditional. In order to live and achieve happiness, we must act in certain ways and not in other ways. Ought and should and shouldn't and these kinds of terms are simply a shorthand way of saying, if you want to live and achieve your happiness, then you must act in these ways and not in other ways. And instead of saying all of that, we just say you ought to act this way, or you shouldn't act that way, or the like. And so these are the terms that guide our thinking and our actions in order to live. We also addressed the so-called naturalistic fallacy and did so in essentially the same manner as we did the is-ought gap, right? You can define good as long as you recognize the fact that the concept of good is not a primary or a starting point, just like the concept of value is not a primary or a starting point, right? Value presupposes an answer to the question of value to whom and for what. And good, likewise, presupposes an answer to the question good to whom and for what. And as soon as you ask those questions, then, if you're talking about a human being, then good means good to the human being for the purpose of enabling him to live and love his life. We then looked at specific moral values and virtues, right? Values being the things that we act to gain or keep or use, and virtues being the actions by which we gain, keep, or use those things. And we looked at the various values and virtues that are necessary for human life. For instance, we saw that moral values such as reason and purpose and self-esteem are essential to human life. We have to use these things or pursue these things in order to live. And we saw that moral virtues are simply the actions by which we gain and keep these things. So these include thinking or using your mind or using reason, producing goods or services for consumption or trade, right? Judging people rationally and treating them accordingly, and so on. We observed all of these facts and we've integrated them into some principles, and those principles are now codified principles that are based on the facts that we observed. In this final session of the course, we're going to consider the social conditions necessary for human beings to live fully as human beings. And let's go ahead and dive right in. Observe that it is not enough for us to just think and identify the values we need in order to live. We must also take the actions necessary to gain and keep such values. This is what the fact-based virtues are all about, right? Those are the actions. To live, we must act on our rational judgment. Well, in light of this fact, an important question arises. How can other human beings, or groups of human beings, or governments stop us from acting on our rational judgment? And the answer is they can do so by using physical force against us. If you're alone on an island, you are fully free to act as you see fit. You're free to build a hut, to look for berries, to make a fishing line, or try to forge a trap for an animal or something, or whatever else you think you ought to do. But if a thug shows up on the island and straps you to a tree, right, you are no longer free. His force has come between your thinking and your doing, between your rational judgment and your life-serving actions. And if he doesn't set you free, you will die in short order. Right? Likewise, suppose a woman in Afghanistan wants to make and sell scarves in order to earn money and live. So she sets up a store selling her scarves. And one day the Taliban agents come along and tell her that because she's a woman, she's forbidden to engage in business and that she must close her store, go home, or face severe punishment, possibly death. Now, clearly, the woman cannot act on her judgment. In her judgment, she should sell scarves and make money so that she can use that money to live. The Taliban is getting between her judgment and her ability to act on her judgment. They are forcing her to act against her judgment, against her basic means of living. So either she will die or she will live a subhuman life. You see what force does to someone. Take another example. Suppose you go to buy a used car and the seller tells you that the car has 60,000 miles on it, but the car actually has 100,000 miles on it. And suppose you buy the car under that false pretense. Now, the seller has defrauded you, right? This is a classic case of fraud. Fraud is a form of indirect physical force. He has told you that the car has this quality, but it doesn't, and that he got your money and you received the car. But notice that you didn't receive the car that you bargained for. He got the money he bargained for, or that he defrauded you for, but you didn't get the car that you bargained for, right? So you don't physically have the thing that you had traded for. You have a different car. So he physically has your property and you don't physically have the thing that you traded for. So this is a form of physical force. It's indirect, granted, but it is physical force because physical exchanges are involved. In order for you to get your money back, you would not only have to know that he has defrauded you, you would also have to physically take the money back from him, right? You'd have to get the money back. Take another example, one more. If you are ill and you want to receive medical treatment from your doctor, but the government stands between you and your doctor and says, no, you may not do business as you mutually see fit because we, the government, are going to tell you what kind of medicine or what procedures are legitimate, right? If that happens, then the government is stopping both you and your doctor from acting on your rational judgment. The government is getting between your judgment and your ability to act on it. and it's stopping you, therefore, from living fully as a human being. Now, we could multiply examples endlessly. You can, I'm sure, think of, dozens more in your own mind. The point here is simply that the use of physical force against a human being stops him from acting on his judgment, his basic means of living. To the extent that physical force is used against the person, it stops him from living as a human being. That's what it means to live as a human being. It means to live, by the judgment of your own mind. Notice that these are facts. They're facts that we can observe and conceptually retain in the form of a principle. The principle is physical force used against a human being stops him from living fully as a human being. And this is not made up. It's an actual observable fact. And this is why, for instance, slavery is morally wrong. If I force someone into a cage or force him to work for me in a field, right, I'm forcing him to act against his rational judgment. I'm forcing him to exist as something less than a human being. That is evil. And it's a special kind of evil because it's an evil that literally makes it impossible for the person to live a human life. These observable facts give rise to our need for a principle to address the problem of people or governments forcing human beings to act against their own judgment. And this is the factual basis for the principle of individual rights. The principle of individual rights is simply the recognition of the fact that in order for a human being to live fully as a human being, he must be fully free to act on the judgment of his own mind. And because the use of physical force against a human being stops him from acting fully as a human being, physical force morally must be banned from social relationships. This is the principle of individual rights. Now observe that there is nothing mysterious or otherworldly about this principle. It doesn't come from God on high, right? It's not from another dimension. It's derived from observation and logic, from looking at reality and using our minds. Nor is the principle of individual rights just made up by human beings. Rather, it is a recognition of the factual requirements of human life in a social context. Now, granted, of course, the principle is formed by human beings, right? We form the idea that, if you use physical force against a person, he can't live as a human being. It is formed by the human mind, but it is not just made up wholesale. It is a recognition of facts that we can see. In order for human beings to live together as human beings, rather than as masters and slaves or as thugs and victims, we simply must refrain from initiating physical force against each other. Now, in light of this fact-based principle, we can begin to see why all laws and all activities of government must be based on and in service of individual rights. Indeed, the very reason we need laws and government to enforce them is so that we can remain free to act on our judgments so that we can live as human beings. You see the big integration here, the connectivity of all of this and how all of it is, based on and arises from facts. Now, there are degrees, and the point here is it's a matter of extent or degree. To the extent that laws and governments protect individual rights, they are moral laws and moral governments. To the extent that they violate individual rights, they are evil laws or evil governments. The bottom line is that the only proper function of governments or of legal systems is to protect individual rights, and to do so by banning physical force from social relationships, and by using physical force only in retaliation and only against those who initiate its use. This is what enables human beings to live. And the only social system that limits government in this way is pure laissez-faire capitalism. Now, this is not the thing that we often hear called capitalism today. It's not the system in the United States today. It's not the system in Great Britain or Canada or any other part of the world that we call free or semi-free. Indeed, capitalism, in the full sense of the term, has never existed yet because there's never been a government completely limited to the protection of rights by banning the initiation of physical force, and a government that is, by constitutional declaration, absolutely forbidden to initiate physical force against citizens. So capitalism has not yet existed, but it is the ideal. Now, a deep dive into the nature and implications of genuine capitalism is a subject for another day, and that is really not the purpose of this course. But if you're interested in this idea, I highly recommend that you read Ayn Rand's book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. It's a beautiful book, really clear about what the history and nature of this system is. Or in addition to that, take a course on capitalism at the Objective Standard Institute. You'll gain a lot from that as well. The point I want to stress here is that the principle of individual rights derives from the principles of rational egoism, right? There's a hierarchy here. Whereas rational egoism holds that people should think rationally and act in a life-serving, self-interested manner, the principle of individual rights holds that because that is true that human beings should do that people morally must be left free so that they can do that, so that they can think rationally and live accordingly. In this sense, the principle of individual rights is really the principle of egoism risen up to the political level or applied at the political level. So people need to act rationally and on their own self-interested purposes in order to live fully as human beings. Force stops them from doing that. We need a principle to stop people from using force against human beings. The principle of individual rights is that principle, and the proper purpose of government is to uphold that principle and enforce it so that people can live. And that's the sort of connectivity between rational egoism and the principle of individual rights. Now let's unify what we've learned in this course into one big integration. What exactly is rational egoism? Well, it's the morality based on and derived from the factual requirements of human life, given the kinds of animals we are, rational animals. That we are rational means that we have the faculty of reason and the capacity to use it. It does not mean that we always use it. It means we have the capacity and can use it. Free will is the choice to use it or not. That's really the locus of what we call free will. It's just in the choice to think or not to think. So that's the connection between reason and free will and the base of this whole thing. And because reason is our means of knowledge and thus our basic means of living, we must use reason if we are to live and love our lives. Now observe, none of this is a matter of opinion. All of it is based on and derived from facts that we can observe. And we've been observing them as we've been talking about these principles throughout this course. So I hope you've sort of gotten, I haven't pointed to every single, fact that we could observe, and I haven't named every single principle that we could derive. But I've given enough, I think, that you can see how this moral code is genuinely based on observation and logic. You can see that it is derived from looking at reality and using reason. And as we've been discussing in this session, in order to act on our rational judgment, in order to live as rational egoists, we have to be free to do so. We have to be free from the one thing that other human beings and groups and governments can use to stop us from acting on our judgment. We must be free from physical force. Now, when we are free, what happens? When we're free, two things. How do we get along with each other? And how do we get things from each other? Well, we get along with each other by means of reason and voluntary consent, right? You engage with people if you see good reason to engage with them, and you say, I'm not going to engage with you if I don't think that there's good reason to engage with you. So you choose your friends accordingly, you choose your business relationships accordingly, and so on. And how do you get things from each other? We get things from each other by means of trade, right? If you produce one thing and I produce another thing, we can trade those things, or we can trade money, the medium of exchange, for things. And that way we can specialize and do the thing that we love to do and produce the kinds of things we love to produce and still buy things from other people who are doing that. And everybody wins. There's no sacrifice. There's no giving up greater values for the sake of lesser values. There's just win-win trade. And that is a beautiful thing. And here we can see the traitor principle in its full and beautiful light. We need other people, and they need us. Human relationships are wonderful things. We get things from each other. We do things for each other. But to live peacefully with each other and to get things from each other in a civilized manner, we must respect each other's rights and autonomy. The traitor principle is our guide for doing so. It's the principle that when we're dealing with human beings, we must offer value for value. We must engage only by voluntary consent and to mutual advantage. This way, we can live and prosper in peace and harmony. As I think you can see, rational egoism is the morality for human flourishing. It is the morality for loving life. I hope you've enjoyed this short course, and I hope you will look further into these ideas. To do so, check out the various courses and articles and conferences produced by the Objective Standard Institute. You can find information about all of these and more on our website, objectivestandard.org. That's it for now. I hope to see you again soon. In the meantime, keep using your mind and loving your life.